So now we're going to go to this other way of thinking about things, which is what's happening in the language essay. It comes after he's written. Let me just keep the dates in mind. Remember that the ultimate work of art is way back in 35. Way later, in 49 and 51. In 49, he writes The Thing. In 1950, he writes the language essay, which is what we're reading. In 1951, he writes Building, Dwelling, and Thinking. So he's right in the middle of this new way of thinking about things when he writes this essay. As you can see, he's got the whole foothold in his word processor. He just dumps them in at a certain point in the discussion. Okay, so now, what is he going to say this time? Well, he wants to understand now a new understanding of what language does when it speaks. We've just been discussing what it does in the style story. Now, now we want to know. Gee, But never mind. I can only confuse you. Let me not say what I thought thinking. Now, instead of the style story, we now want to know about we want a thinking understanding. And so we're going to pick an example of language, speaking, and naming, and it's going to happen this time through the poet. Right? In the style essay, it was in the style period in Origin of the Work of Art, it was the thinker who named being. Yeah, that was the job of the thinker. The poet made a work, and it worked like a tragedy or something. But now we're going to have poetry as the job of naming things, singing. And the idea is not that only poems do it, or only poets do it, but Heidegger thinks that by choosing a poem, he can find the kind of paradigm case, the most clear case of what happens when naming is related to things singing. And he's going to choose this kind of super meal, the bread and wine, which has overtones of the Mass, the Eucharist, and is sort of the sort of paradigm celebratory ritualistic meal. And by taking this very pure case, he's going to get you to see what's happening a lot of the time, but he doesn't. But so let's start with that. So he's just even starting out and this is a bit far-fetched, it seems to me, I mean, very far-fetched, but just naming the snow already makes it seem to be very snowy. And I take it as that's what's happening here. Window with the falling snow arrayed. He doesn't just say snow, but by having it up against the window like that, that's when you see snow in its snowiest. So he says on 198 that language speaks, and then he says that after that, the little verse, the speaking names the snow, and then it goes on and it names the winter time. And what is it doing when it's doing all that? Well, he says a little further down, this naming does not hand out titles, it does not apply terms, but it calls into the word. That is, the naming calls brings closer what it calls. And what does it do a little lower? It brings it into nearness. Thus it brings the presence of what was previously uncalled into a nearness. At the very bottom, the calling here calls into a nearness. I think all that means is that when the poet finds just the right way for describing snow, it brings snow out in its snowiest thing. It brings snow out in its own most, and that's what we're supposed to think here. That's supposed to be different than naming it for the first time, I think. Although it's subtly, it could be very similar, but there's always been snow, and people have named snow, and before this too, and named it into its snowiest. So, but what's happening here is just one more case where that's done, and that's what interests him. I asked myself at this point, because I was arguing about it with Liz, and I'm still not sure what the answer is. But the question is naming necessary for bringing something into its nearness, for bringing something into its own, or that is, or more generally, for anything to sing? These are very closely related. Just how bringing something into its own and things singing are supposed to be related is never explained. Because when you bring the snow into it doesn't seem like the meal, which is the thing, presumably. But so both, when you name something just so it shows up in its riches, or when you name a thing so that it things, the question is, do you have to name it? Could it be brought out in its richest? Could things thing if you didn't name it? In other words, is naming necessary, or just it just sometimes happens that way? That's when you name it, it things times. Well, I guess Heidegger thinks, my hunch is Heidegger thinks the naming is necessary. That seems to be how the way things go here. And I don't think that's too far-fetched. It's something like this. Finding the right words in any situation makes the situation clearer, is what I think Heidegger was trying to say.
Well, it might be, I mean, what you just said might sound like naming can sort of add the extra dollop of clarity and almostness to something that might already be singing along.
Right. Well, that's the most accurate.
That's a weaker story than saying you've got to have a name for it to sing.
Right, you're right. I can't make that case that you've got to have a name for it to sing at all. I'm just not convinced that that's the way it goes.
The only way, I think the way you want to make that argument would be say, well, you have to have language already in general in order to be encountering beings as beings,
that doesn't fit
style and all that.
No,
and
what about naming though? I mean, you have to find, that's naming means in my jargon here, trying to find the phenomena, finding the right words. It doesn't always mean that's snow. I mean, the general, when he gets up at the dinner in the celebratory feast to make that whole long speech, is finding the right words. He's naming the same thing. But so the question is, when you're finding these right words, what are you doing? I mean, could the thing not, was it not thinking until the general got up and said these words to just make it concrete? Well, I can't make that case. And neither can Liz. We can make the weaker case. I think you'd agree with me. But it's done even better afterward than before, and that it's always going to increase the clarity and the shining if you find the right words. That's the strongest case I can make. Yeah.
I think you can save yourself by reinvoking forms of the primordial language. The language that's naming things.
That's true.
Like the podium's being named, even though we're not.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a minute. Show me that. I mean, what kind of phenomena would that be? This mystical thing is naming all this junk around, the water bottles and the podium.
The things that are things. In the wine.
Well, not everything is singing. I'm not sure my podium is singing.
You'll say the wine is.
Yeah, sure.
So the wine is singing before the.
No, that's what we're worrying about. It's not obvious.
It's singing before the.
Well, because we've got the word wine already.
For the wine to be present.
Yeah.
Language has to mean.
For the wine to be present, that's a different story. I think that's a very strong claim.
What we've got here, we've got the whole story about style and about language being offered as sort of already being established, already sort of off in the background, right? And then for the thing to think, that's a more particular question. And you're asking whether you have to have the right words then for the thing to think there and now. So it seems like you don't have a language the wine in order to show up at all.
This is the naming for the first time business, we're saying. Yes, if language somebody hadn't, while they were drinking this stuff, that just said, this is wine, wonderful thing, this wine, this Dionysian super stuff, then nobody might have noticed. They might have just been like water and just stuff you drink when you're thirsty or something, I suppose. But wine got named a long time ago and got into a certain style of life. And now the question is, when a jug of wine things, what then? And then we're trying to say, then, well, if you're a poet and if you say the right words in the right way, you can make it even more, bring out more what it is to be wine than ever before. That the wine got named before with that. That's, you're going to take that.
What about, and I don't even know if you consider it being nice, but they did it at the end. If he had left without saying anything to her, it was what he said that made clear what they were each feeling possibly all these years, and it really brought them together. If he had left
Right.
and said nothing to her in the coat room,
Well, there's something very interesting going on there, which I thought about, but I didn't bring into the lecture because I don't know how it fits with what Heidegger's saying. Let me make a distinction between what he said in his sort of toast, which was somehow what he was doing to focus the dinner and
Right.
doing it all, and what he said to her.
Yeah.
Let's not even just think about what he said to her. Think of the simplest, purest case. This Charles Taylor, who likes to think about these things, simplest, purest case. When having been with somebody a long time and always being happy when you're with them and always missing them when you're away, you say to yourself or to them, I love them, or I love you. Now, that really crystallizes something that was just inchoate before. And it's as if somehow, why I didn't want to bring it up is, it's as if he's named it for the first time. And yet, of course, we know what it is, and we know it's just this is an instance of it. But somehow, I guess you want to say, if you say it again in the right tone of voice at the right moment in the right way, it's from your love and you just named it into being. That's what Charles Taylor thinks. And that's what he's doing with the girl.
yes.
Exactly what he's doing with the girl. And that's mine on now. Yeah, here it is. Now it's on. Okay. Now help me remember that I need to. Okay. So I had one more way to put this. Let me see. Where was it? Okay. Another quote. Again, I'm afraid not from what you're reading, from an essay called Words this time. He's talking about doing what the poet does, what I just said. Now, the poet, remember, is finding this way of saying, finding the appropriate word, saying something unique that hasn't been said before, to bring out something that hasn't been brought out before. In order to do this, names are necessary. They are words by which what already is and is believed to be is made so concrete and full of being. That's what I was been calling richness and clarity. Made so concrete and full of being that it henceforth shines and blooms and reigns as the beautiful everywhere in the land. So we've got all those words in there now. Shining and something like clarity and something like richness. And only when the poet finds the right words do you bring that off. Now, the nearest thing I could find in our reading, so it doesn't look like we're just off in nowhere from what you've read, is on 135. In the end of the top paragraph, before the quote there, or the poem there, or the whatever he's quoting there, further. For appropriating saying brings to light all present beings in terms of their properties. Their properties must be what is most proper to them, I presume. I didn't have time to go back and look. Greg, can you? It can't be. What? It is Eigenschaft. That is unfortunate. But then he must be making a pun. Sort of on Eigenschaft would be their own most. Oh, Eigen is own. So properties has in it, what is most proper. So it may not sound to him as if he's saying something misleading. But when I hear properties, I hear something like the features of objects, like this property of this to be brown and hard and so forth. And that's certainly not what he wants. Oh yeah, they're all clustering right around the same place, but I'll tell you. So first I was reading from The Nature of Language, which was 58. Then I was reading from Words, which is 58. The Way to Language is 59. So those are sort of the way language condenses all this stuff which he has spelled out in other essays with more detail. What happens? Eigentum, not Eigenschaft. That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, Eigentum is just.
Eigentum is property in the sense of stuff you own, isn't it? It's not property in the sense of features. So that's better for me. But is it a pun? I guess it's a sort of a pun. It's properties which are sort of your own richness, your property. It's all playing around with the word proper, which is what you want. So let's go back. For appropriating saying brings to light all present beings in terms, I want to say, let's say what's most proper to them. It lauds, that is, allows them into their nature. Well, that's a condensed version of what I just read that poets do when they use language. So what's Heidegger done? Well, I think he's done what he's so interesting and good at doing. So far, he has found something which seems to me sort of clear and uncontroversial when you see it. This phenomenon of finding the Lamojus, the perfect word, and how important it is, and how it does something more basic than using the banal public words. And in typical Heidegger way, he's found this phenomena that is sort of so pervasive and so obvious that it's been missed not only by the subject-object representational way of being, and by the postmodern cybernetic information understanding, it seems to have been missed from the start in the West. He doesn't even claim to go back, and as far as I know, and say that the pre-Socratics knew it. The nearest thing is that 700 BC, Anaximander, he only has one sentence of Anaximander. There's only one sentence existing. And in that sentence is this word browse. And that's the nearest thing he's got to claiming, I guess, that anybody ever had it. Even Anaximander doesn't bring browse into relation to language, I guess. No, never mind. Nobody's got it till Heidegger. And so much for what I think is, once you see it, obvious. I don't feel I've said anything that isn't sort of staring you in the face once it's said. But I do think he makes two controversial claims, and I think it's important to know also what he's saying when he's saying something more than is obvious and more than I can justify, though it doesn't seem wrong to me. So the question is, I don't know how to get into this exactly. I mean, it's clearly language for Heidegger is more than words. He's stretching the notion of language. It's what bids us to respond and bring things out in their own. But language is close to words, so that it includes all the ways that things speak to us. And we can respond to them. But it's always tied close to words. I mean, Heidegger is not going to include under language, I think, really different forms of activity, like dancing, though I'm not sure. But he certainly isn't going to include something like building a car, which I'm going to say in a minute seems to me a candidate for what appropriation might like somebody to do and call Henry Ford to do. But let me start. So language, to begin with, is broader than words, but it's not broad enough to cover the way appropriation really works, is what I'm going to say. I just want to disagree with Heidegger, because I really do, and because also, when you disagree, then you see what somebody's saying, and then maybe you want to disagree with me, and then you'll understand better what Heidegger's saying. But to begin with, so on 126, where I was reading about we ourselves speak, and so forth. Now, after that, right after that, you see ourselves in italics, just a little below the middle of 126. Then the next sentence. Saying is in no way the linguistic expression added to the phenomena after they've appeared. Well, that could just mean, and that's how I used to think, well, of course it's not, because saying the right words is what brings things out in their own most. I mean, the general doesn't just add a comment to the feast, which corresponds to what's going on already. That's exactly the wrong way to think about it. The general brings out the feast into shining when he talks. But it's not quite what Heidegger's saying here. Saying is in no way the linguistic expression added to the phenomena after they appear. Rather, all radiance appearance and all fading away rests in the showing saying. Now, that means maybe that showing saying could be broader than language. Anything that brings things into their radiance, that makes things shine. Saying sets all present beings free into their given presence and brings what is absent into its absence. I think that has to do with the way poems can bring something absent right into the classroom, but I'm not sure. And saying opens the clearing, and so forth. But it looks to me like whatever he's saying here, and it's not very clear to me, though it's broader than using words, it's still in the business somehow close to speaking and using words. And he'll later claim that using words is the best version of it. Now, I want to say there could be things just utterly unrelated to using words. First, let me show you where it comes close to that he's talking about words. I said that it's clear that he thinks that, no, it isn't. That quote won't do.
So the disagreement is the two things isn't just words, it could be words and more things.
Right. No, I think it could be something without any words either. Not just words and something. And I'll try to give you two examples where there will be words are running around all right, but they'll be just public banal words. There won't need, no poets are necessary for Henry Ford to make automobiles. But automobiles seem to me to do a whole lot of gathering and coordinating of practices and bringing, it's a new sort of thing, and it brings all sorts of new understanding of space and of who we are. It gathers together and it coordinates roads and gas pumps and garages and parking lots and repair shops and shopping malls. It brings about the end of the inner city. It supposedly changes sex when the back seats of cars are available before people can just bring their girlfriends and boyfriends home. And all of this is happening, and Henry Ford is doing it by making a mass-produced car. Now, why isn't that? That way of being an entrepreneur and making an object that changes the practices and opens up a new discursive space, an equally good thing for appropriation and as poetry. And as I want to say, he did it with a lot of machinery and just banal, ordinary Wittgensteinian kind of language. Speech acts, lots of speech acts, I'm sure, were involved. Ordering, describing, and requesting, and promising, and so forth. Or another one, which I like a lot, is I take Marilyn Monroe, my favorite goddess. I think she brings forth a new feminine style, and she does it by the way she smiles, and the way she walks, the way she sits, the way she looks at men, and she talks. But I don't remember anything very special about the way Marilyn Monroe talks. Maybe I missed it. But it just doesn't seem to be the mode in which she's doing her form of helping air rightness, helping appropriation gather and open up a new world. So anyway, that's my disagreement, and you can think about it and decide what you think. And if you have a clear view about it, it could be a possible paper topic. Heidegger certainly holds, this much is sure, that words are the best way of doing it. Even if language is very stretched and saying is very stretched, so that not only dancing but car manufacturing and just being Marilyn Monroe are modes of language, are sign systems or something. Nonetheless, Heidegger thinks it's really words that do it best. Remember, he already said in Origin of the Work of Art, the same time, remember, I objected already then, poems are better than temples for truth setting itself to work. Poems trump temples and thinkers, and which is very modest of him. He always thinks that he's second rate to poets, I believe. There's like Hölderlin, he sort of has to be parasitical, Hölderlin. So poems trump thinkers and statesmen and gods, like Marilyn Monroe, and martyrs, and everything else in bringing about a new style. And of course, he hasn't given that view up. On 134, here you still see it, where he says about the middle paragraph, about 6 lines, saying is in need of being voiced in the word, period. I mean, not dance, not mass-produced. It needs words. And the strongest formulation I know isn't in here. It's unfortunately, again, in this essay, Words. It's so strong, it's hard for me to believe Heidegger kept it. He says on 146, the word first bestows presence, that is being, in which things appear as beings. So there, I mean, the word is just fundamental to letting there be any beings as anything. That's the sort of just below the middle of 146. If you want, this should be, I mean, I have to put this on reserve, I guess, now that I'm quoting from it. If it isn't on reserve already, in the philosophy library, can you help me remember Forrest or Liz? I mean, let's hope they've already got it, or if they haven't, let's hope we can run out and buy it. If anybody sees on the way to language, say at Cody's or no more, Moe's or something, see it, you found it at Cody's. It's in print again, in paperback. Oh, good. Well, then I can get one and put it in the library. Yeah.
I was just identifying the writers, these
No,
historical things.
I see. Oh, no, I think it's behind them.
Well, that's my point. So it wouldn't be a style. It would be the style.
Okay, or, well, that isn't how I put it, but I agree with you that it's behind them. It's what makes it possible for there to be styles, because styles are ways that practices are coordinated. And this is the tendency of practices to coordinate themselves or to become coordinated. So yes, it's more basic than style. I tried to say that when I said that sort of appropriation uses language and saying to bring out things, styles, whatever.
But you're talking about new style. All of these things were pointing to the things that were setting new style.
Mhm. Well, but okay, what underlies there being any style, I agree with you, or new styles, either one.
If they say something talk about the style of having, that would be closer to the writers. But
Well,
the very nature of this kind of culture that has style in the first place.
well, interesting. I have a quote that's very relevant to this, but it's on 146. It may cast some light. It's no, it isn't the one on 146. I'm trying to think. Somewhere he says, very near it, that in effect,
Is that the language would have a different role under those circumstances. When you look at a style,
well, I would be happy with. Well, no, I wouldn't. I mean, are you bringing appropriation now? How close to linguistic? That's what we have to discuss.
well, that's it, yeah.
Yes, I mean, to call it a style seems neutral on this issue about linguistic. I mean, words. Let's keep using language is so tricky because Heidegger's got this silent language, which is not words. But the question is, what about words? How important are they? In what Ariadne seems to need language as saying, and language as saying seems to need words. And it seems Heidegger's thesis that appropriation comes out in its fullest and richest by using words. Now, maybe that's what you just said, or maybe it isn't.
The same. So,
Yes, the saying, I think saying is is it the showing or what makes possible? Well,
the German one.
okay, and how about and the showing makes possible the shining, or is that also, how much are these supposed to be equated according to you?
So I'm not sure there's much, signing that's going on with the saying. At least with that.
Well, it's the saying.
Saying is gathering.
The saying is a gathering and not a show.
Not a signing.
Not a sign. The saying is the way gathering works,
Yeah.
and that brings things out into their richest. And sometimes when he talks about that, he'll say they shine, because that's, I think, really finally synonymous for bringing them out in their own most for him. And sometimes he doesn't. But I read you a few quotes where they did shine. Okay, but what I want to say is, I think Forrest and I probably disagree about something, but I don't think we should try to say more here, just because I think I'm going to run out of time. But there is a claim, which is sort of extreme and interesting, and I've been disagreeing with it, is that appropriation, that is gathering, that is their rightness, comes out in its own most. You got to raise it up one, raise the ante one level. When it, by way of language, by way of saying, by way of showing, calls us, and we use words, then appropriation is at its best. Now that's the claim that I'm not convinced by, but I'll read you the claim in the middle of 127. Third sentence in the middle paragraph. This owning, which brings them there, what are we talking? Maybe I better begin at the beginning. The moving force in this showing, I'm beginning at the beginning of saying is owning. It's really ownness. That's this properness. It is what brings all present and absent beings each into their own. That's nice. From where they show themselves, and what they are, and where they abide according to their kind. This owning, which brings them there, and which moves saying as showing in its showing, we call appropriation. I mean, behind it all, so to speak, is appropriation. That's what brings things out and moves saying to bring them out and so forth. It yields the opening of the clearing in which present beings can persist and from which absent beings can depart, while keeping their persistence in the withdrawal. That's fine, but that isn't the quote I want, because the quote I want has words in it. So now I have to find what has happened to the quote I want, where appropriation comes out most in words. Well, I'll find it in a minute.
Are you thinking of at the very bottom, the being itself? No.
No, I don't think so. But I think it might be. And I could look over here, but I think I'll look over here. I guess it's here on the middle of 129, maybe. From the man, well, no, that's human beings, certainly, according to Heidegger. By the way, while we're at it, another thesis of Heidegger's, which I was going to have in here and dropped, and which I think I do agree with, though I don't know what the argument for it is that man comes most into his own when he's speaking. That he says on 129.
There has to be the speaking language more.
Oh, really? Well, okay.
That's why it comes.
Gee, that's
That's the argument.
okay. In showing saying which consists in appropriate, the most appropriate number, saying. No, I think I'm putting things together on 131, which I may not have a right to put together. I'm not sure. Let me read the top paragraph. What I'm trying to get him to say, and we can just see whether he says it. And there are two possibilities. That he says that appropriation comes into its own most when it's saying, showing, and so forth. Or does appropriation come into its own most when it's saying and we're saying in response by speaking with words? I'm not sure. Let me read what we've got here and see what comes out. At the top of 131. What looks like a confused tangle becomes untangled, and we see it in the light of the way-making movement and so forth. That movement delivers saying to speech. That's what I'm getting into. Saying, speech is words, right? That's speaking. Of course, there's speaking that isn't saying. That's just speech act. And then there's poetic speaking and pure prose, which is. That movement delivers saying to speech. Saying keeps the way open along with speaking, as listening catches from saying what is to be said and raises what it thus is caught and received into the sounding word. This is how I got here. The way making saying into spoken language is the delivering bond that binds by appropriating. And then language delivers its own and so forth and so forth. Now it looks like the rest is still under the general term of business of finding the sounding word. And then I skip a paragraph. Language which speaks by saying, and speak means finds words, is concerned that our speaking and listening to the unspoken corresponds to what is said. That's find the mot juste again. Thus, silence too, which is often regarded as a source of speaking, is itself already a corresponding. So sometimes it can be appropriate to keep silent. That's all right. Silence corresponds to the soundless tone and stillness of appropriating, showing, saying.
But that first speaking above is speaking of language.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, language, you're right. Language speaks by saying.
Yeah.
We respond, back up at the top paragraph, by speaking back in spoken language. Now, here's the question. The crucial sentence is, we now got silence is also going to do it. And now, as showing, saying, which consists in appropriation, as showing, saying, which consists in appropriation, is the most proper mode of appropriating. Appropriating is by way of saying. Accordingly, language always speaks according to the mode in which appropriation and such reveals itself or withdraws. Now, does that say that human speaking is the way appropriation is comes most into its own or not? I really don't know. But I bet that's what Heidegger thinks. Given the way he says that poetry is better than temple. Do you think
I don't think maybe it's that here.
One way, okay, well then all I can say is, I think he believes it. I have no quote that says it. So many quotes go in the direction that poets, my picture is, I think Heidegger thinks that poets do for appropriation what appropriation does for everything else, namely brings it out in its thing. And if he doesn't say that anywhere, then he should.
Rather than saying poets do this, poetry is part of it.
Yes.
Okay, but
No, they're not the only. Poetry isn't the only thing. Poetry is the paradigm, which is another way to say poetry does it at its best, and that brings out appropriation at its best. Okay, right. Okay, yes, but poetic art is higher than any other art, or at least back in origin on the way to language. Okay, but that means, okay, I'll grant you again, the best way to do it is with words. What? Okay, the best way to see, the best way to let things shine is with words, no? And that means if Ariadne is trying to get everything to shine, which is my picture, I know, not yours, if Ariadne is trying to get everything to shine, and the best way to do it is with poetic words, of course, or pure prose, then Ariadne comes into its own most, that is, it's at its best, when it can use language, the silent language, and the saying in that language, to call us to respond with poetry, the paradigm kind of response, and thereby light up new stuff. That's what I think, and I think that's what he thinks, and I think it's wrong. But and that's because I like my Henry Ford and Marilyn Monroe doing it just as well. But there you are. You can think about that. I want to go on because how are we doing? Well, not too badly, but there's still two things I want to cover. Let me see where I am. Okay, so the strongest formulation, I read that. See, that's why I want this formulation on 146, which, by the way, that strong formulation that the word first bestows presence, that is being, in which things appear as being. I mean, if he went that far, then my case is made. Then it turns out finally that there wouldn't even be anything if it weren't for words. And I can't believe it. What?
The poet position, the first stanza of the orchid.
Actually, and he doesn't go along with it.
Well, no.
I thought that you thought, I'm really partly influenced by your paper. I thought that you thought that what the poet renounces was the attempt to put the language itself or into words, that is, Ariadne into words. The deepest thing going on, you can't finally find the words that enable us to get a grip on it, so to speak. Are we disagreeing? Anyway, let's talk in my office, because to have a discussion of something they haven't read is not good for, and something I haven't read either for a long time, only through your paper, is not going to be a good idea. You know what you said better than I. Yeah.
That is exactly, I think, the point of this. Poetry renounces this.
But a poet of naming anything or naming the way language works?
No, I think naming anything, that's the responsibility of the poet. I think that's middle and if about language, and then later I had to see that that's
But this is 58, this thing.
no, that's what I mean. That's why you have the renunciation.
Wait, let's hear that again. What's the middle position if we renounce?
That it is naming. But language is about naming things into being. The poet has to see that this isn't his. That he is not the one renaming something else doing.
Okay, too many unsettled
Things
points.
in the fire.
Okay, but you've got enough, I hope, of the overall picture to be able to now think about it sort of critically, and think about the phenomena, and think about what Heidegger's claiming and describing, and how much of it you buy. And I'm going to go on. So now we've got to the Carlos question. We get there by going back to the gentle law, because from now on we're going to talk about, or for a while we're going to talk about, how the gentle law is so gentle that it lets itself get bent out of shape. And that's what makes it such a funny kind of gentle law. Most kinds of laws, sort of Kantian laws, and the kind of laws philosophers generally believe in, are just plain laws, and you can't go against them. Like the laws of physics, you can't go against. But Ariadne, you can. I'm looking for the general law passage.
128.
Okay. Yeah. So on 128, I'm going to read that important paragraph again. Appropriation grants to mortals their abode within their nature, so that they may be capable of being those who speak. And speak is always use words, right? I take it. And you can do it in two ways. But we are talking about speaking as responding, that is, as saying. If we understand law as the gathering that lays down that which lets all beings to be present in their own, in what is appropriate for them, then appropriation is the plainest and most gentle of laws. I think that's all I need. Yeah, okay. Now, and and the law, and what is that law? Well, the things are gathered into mutual belonging together. At the little paragraph on 125, saying is itself the abode of a rest which grants the quiet of mutual belonging to all that belongs within the structure of the being of language. Structure is always, what word do we think is there always for structure? The fused, the gathering,
Fit together.
fitting together, I think is sort of near the German. Never, the structure sounds too Kantian or something. So, but there's a word there, fused, like a box fused, which is the way everything fits together and the way a fuse fits together. So saying is the abode of rest which grants the quiet of mutual belonging, that's the gathering stuff, to all that belongs within the fitting together of the being of language. It's a question mark, but that's just a rhetorical. Or, so it's a claim of Heidegger's. Now, I have to say that because now comes the amazing claim. Now we're at the, which Darian, remember last time, jumped ahead and said, but how could this be, if this is the law that covers everything, then at the bottom of 131, even enframing must be a mode of appropriation. And then you get the very peculiar idea that enframing, which is the way everything is dispersed, disseminated, disaggregated, and flexibly, constantly spread around and rearranged, like the electricity that is switched about ever anew in the technology essay, that should be a mode of gathering what belongs together. This is very upsetting and amazing and confusing. But Heidegger's going to sort of take it head on. He is really going to argue that, yes, indeed, enframing is a mode of appropriating. And it is, you could put it this way if you want to hear it in its weirdest form, challenging forth is a mode of calling forth. But, and of course the thesis is, they're very perverted modes. That is not just very perverted, but the most distorted. The right translation at the bottom, I'm going to read now, starting where it says appropriation on 131. Appropriation can still only, for thinking that pursues the appropriation can still only surmise it, and yet can experience it even now in the nature of modern technology, which we call by the still strange sounding name of enframing. Remember, it's just a difference of translation. Because enframing challenges man, that is, provokes him to order and set up all that is present being as technical inventory. Enframing persists after the manner of appropriation, specifically by simultaneously. And now, I don't think the only right word there is distorting, the element. So simultaneously distorting appropriation, in that all ordering finds itself challenged into calculated thinking and speaks the language. I don't want to go to the language yet. That's the next topic. Right now, all I want to say is that this isn't just any old distortion, but it's the most extreme possible distortion. The most extreme distortion of calling forth, nurturing, is challenging forth. The most extreme way of bringing things out into their own is to bring them out as flexible resources that don't have any own or any essence. It's so extreme that you wonder whether it isn't sort of off the chart. And the question is, can Heidegger make that claim seem plausible? In the question concerning technology, you can see him, I mean, he knows what he's up to here. He says about enframing, the bottom of page 20. Enframing means the gathering together. So he's setting it up there. The gathering together of that setting upon, which sets upon man, challenges him forth to reveal the real in the mode of ordering as standing reserve. Okay, so how can it be the gathering together of the setting upon that challenges him forth to disseminate it? That's the peculiar claim.
But it's a way of reading.
Yes, okay. And yes, well, that's the right thing to say, but now I want to try to spell it out. What is it about the mode of revealing that makes it a gathering, even when what is revealed in that mode of revealing is a disseminating dispersion, just the absolute antithesis of gathering. Now, I agree with Forrest. The trick is to say, well, appropriation is going on the level of the mode of revealing, and what's going on, and it's bringing something out into its own, namely, resources are being shown to be as dispersed and as flexible, and people are shown to have no identities whatsoever, but to switch from situation to situation, and all of that is produced by the gathering on the level of mode of revealing. I'm going to try to explain what that means.
I just don't disseminate.
Oh, disseminating is just a shorthand word I'm using from Derrida. I want to say things are becoming resources, which means switched about. Oh no, they're all becoming the same, but they're becoming the same, namely, they're all becoming switched about ever anew, interchangeable, flexible, disaggregated. Now, of course, on a certain level, they're all becoming the same what I just said. But that would just seem to me to be a trick. I mean, if you said that what they all were the same, namely utterly, taken apart, ripped up, torn into pieces, scattered about, that's what makes them gathered and coming out into their own. That gets very hard to picture. I don't want to do it that way. I mean, if Forrest can make that work, that's, fine. My story is half of Forrest's story. I want to say he's got gathering on the level of the mode of revealing, and things are gathered on the mode of revealing. Things that are gathered in this most distorted mode of revealing are, no, that's not what I want to say at all. Something is gathered at the level of mode of revealing. That's the passage I read from the question concerning technology. And what's gathered there is a certain kind of clearing, a certain style. And that style, which is gathered, is a style in which every specific thing isn't gathered at all, but is disseminated around or broken up and scattered. That's what I want to try to argue. Yeah, Darren.
I just want to maybe 40 examples.
Not my version of Henry Ford. I mean, I was talking about how the car has gathered roads, parking lots, shopping malls, people, adolescent couples and everything all together. I don't think that's relevant how mediocre they are. The question is, are they being brought out in their own, where their own means that they have an essence? The picture is, at dinners, fathers are most fatherly, and mothers are most motherly, and kids are most kid-like as they throw the food at each other, let's say. But whatever, that there is some sort of properness, and you can bring it out. But the essence of this story is that there's no properness, not just because it's been leveled, but because it's the actual job to figure out. I mean, in business now, there are a million different kinds of stock options, all kinds of instruments for saving money, and they just keep thinking of new ones, and everything gets more and more distinguished. Or what struck me most once, but you're too old to know, is that there were once only about 6 kinds of cars. There were Chevys and Chryslers and Fords and Studebakers once upon a time, and there was one variety of each, and you could recognize it, and then they proliferated till there's a kind of Chevy that goes up to almost to being a Lincoln, and there's kinds of Chryslers that go down almost to being the cheapest car. Everything gets just proliferated, and I grant you that there's a kind of banality and mediocrity about it, but that's not the point. In fact, and just talk business talk now, the claim is that now we've got a lot more quality because we've got a lot more varieties, and we can fit each one exactly to the needs of each family. So it's not crude banality, if you want. It's dispersed specificity. Yeah, but
I'm wondering how things are gathered out there almost. But maybe is making things efficient.
I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what I want to say too, with just a slight modification to make it, I think, closer to the phenomenon. I think instead of saying practices here, it helps to say skills. then we have skills for disaggregating things, and that those skills are getting more and more rich, more and more refined, more and more collected. So we have more and more skills for disaggregating more and more things in more and more subtle ways. It's the skills, or as Cliff says, the practices that are being brought out in a new gathering in their own most. And for us, it's not easy just to be a resource. You've got to have a lot of skill to keep quitting one job and taking on the next, to be able to take on a new identity on every time you go to a different chat room, and a new identity every time you go to a different job. That takes a really refined bunch of practices and skills. That's what I want to say. So to be a receiver and preserver of any style, there are skills you have to get better at. You have to have skills for cultivating, and then you have to have skills for objectifying, and you have to have skills for disaggregating yourself and everything else into pure, flexible stuff, resources. And you have skills for morphing, which is the latest thing, for changing your identity to fit the situation. And those skills, they do gather in more and more skills. And then they bring you out in your own most, and this is where it sounds like a joke, as a resource that has no own most. And that's what Heidegger's trying to get away with. And I think maybe he does. I'm not sure. You bring out everything in its extreme flexibility, its lack of essence, in its difference in each different situation. That's why I call it Derridean dissemination. I think that's what Derrida does. Yes, but oh, good. Well, that's good. Forrest has put in a neat move. When I say things have no essence, that's a kind of pun in Heidegger. I think they have no own most. If that means something about them, like an old-fashioned identity, which gets clearer and clearer as you get older and you get more and more character, or being an old-fashioned father, which you learn to do gradually from when you muff it at first with your first kid, but by the second or third, you're good at it. Now but it could mean, and this is what Forrest says, where essence just means how it works. And then, of course, you bring even the resources out in their essence, because they work as flexible.
Because it's a way of revealing, it's going to bring things in their own mode. The way of revealing in technology is going to bring things in their own mode.
Well, yes, I mean, if you can buy that, where own most no longer has where you switch the meaning of, it's the right move. What's proper to them is that there's nothing proper to them, except because they'll be different in every situation. But that's now what's proper to them. That's right. That is what makes them, what brings out a resource in its own most is that it could be just anything, depending on the situation.
That's what everybody is.
Right. But in every other mode of revealing, there was some content in the own most. Now the point is that the own most is just precisely to have no content, but to be changeable in every situation. And then, so you have to make a move about where own most gets generalized in a very interesting way, and you have to decide whether you think that's true to the meaning of own most or whether it's a trick. Well, it's like saying my identity has content when I'm different in every chat room and in every job, and I have 15 of them in the course of my lifetime. What's the content? Namely, I'm flexible enough to do that. Okay, well, that's the trick again. I don't know. You can take it or leave it, but that's certainly what Heidegger's doing. Let me just catch up with us, because you all ran ahead of me. I thought this was going to be hard to explain, and here you're explaining it to me. Okay, let's see. So, well, while as our identity gets dispersed, our skills get richer and richer and more refined, and bring in other skills at morphing, at being able to disperse our identity. So, as preservers of and framing, we're getting better and better at the very time that we're getting less and less of an identity. So entities don't get gathered in more focus, and people don't get gathered in more focus. They don't come to shine in that way anymore. If they shine at all, they shine by getting ungathered and unfocused. While the skills get more gathered, focused, and more articulated, and better at tearing things and people apart. That's the funny thing. Okay, and the opposite intuition, just to keep the sort of Derridian intuition, because we need to see an opposite, is that what skills are for isn't for getting better and better at revealing things in some way, but what we just said, Derrida would say, is that skills are for getting better and better at constantly doing new things. And so what we want to do is develop skills for having a different identity and dealing with things in different ways, and it's just somehow a joke to say that the skill is we're getting a richer and richer skill when what we're really getting is skill at doing different things all the time in different situations.
Not very good.
Okay, let's
Between having the skills themselves, average, you have one skill that enables you to be maximally flexible versus having a bunch of distinct skills.
let me try. I'm not sure I get it either, so let me try. So, if you're having skills, the old-fashioned thing was you get better and better at doing one thing, namely your identity, and you help things like dinners get better and better. Now you've got skills which are better and better at doing lots of different things, and constantly being able to adapt to new situations. Our skills are now Heidegger wants to say, but those skills are a kind of gathering, namely the gathering, the gathering of the ability to do different new things all the time. I think the opposite intuition is that when you've got skills for doing new things all the time, there really isn't any such
Any
thing.
one skill.
Right, exactly. Any one skill called skills for
Called
doing
being
new things
flexible,
all the time. You just admitted that gathering is over, that technology is one, and you can either be sorry about it like Heidegger or cheer for it like a postmodern. That's the point. Now let me see if I can, because I want to get on to the next thing if there's time. Yeah. Well, let me just read where I am. So, okay. So now that's the story of how appropriation as a general law can get bent out of its shape, clear into its opposite, seeming opposite. And still behind it all will be, according to Heidegger, a kind of gathering that brings things out in some way at their best and makes them work the way they're supposed to work if according to the current style. Now, I guess I should stop, but you've been saying things already, but if anybody has still got something they want to say that they didn't get a word in edgewise, I'm ready to hear it. Good. Okay, I'll hear it. I may not follow it up because I've got 15 minutes.
For the technology that you want to set up the danger and the saving. And here, like less optimistic because
There's still a mystery. I see. Okay. It's easy to say what the answer to that is. I see what you want. Remember, this is appropriation at its most distorted, not at its most appropriate, and not being brought out at its best. It would be brought out at its best if it was not only gathering ontologically as a mode of revealing, but if it was a mode of revealing that let every individual entity come out at its richest and shine. There's no shining for resources, I think. So the answer from Heidegger is, this is a very primitive and distorted form of appropriation, but notice it's still a form of appropriation. Therefore, if you get into the right relation to it, you can still be in touch with what is important about human beings, namely that they're vehicles for appropriation, speaking through them. But it would be better if we had a new God where there was a new temple shining, or better if we could preserve the humble things shining, because there's a lot more ownmost being brought out in those cases than there is in the technology case. I think that's my version of the answer. Liz doesn't like that.
Well, no, I like that fine, but now I'm worried about the extent that technically is a mode of appropriation. I wonder about the claim of the greatest danger, that where the greatest danger is that our role as preservers will be undermined, and that yeah, there will seem to be
Okay.
you're showing up.
Yeah.
It seems like
Yeah.
you're saying, well, yeah, you're still, I mean, everything we've been saying, well, you're still preserving this mode of renewal. So
Yes.
why
yes.
is that, why is our role act? How does the capitulation of us as orderers into mere reasons ourselves follow out of,
Yes.
uh,
I see that. I see that.
Like,
So
like
you're right.
go along merrily doing
Right.
this?
Well, yeah, okay, we got to balance both sides. This is good. I mean, Heidegger's got this. There's something terribly wrong and dangerous about technology, and even technology could be the saving power if you get in the right free relation to it. Now, what we've gone is way over on the right free relation to it now. It looks like just fine. I mean, it's just another way that you can be a vehicle for appropriation, and that's what your job is. And now you're disclosing what he calls, interestingly enough, an unworld. I mean, not a world in some places because it's so dispersed. And the question is, are you being called? Is that enough, or are human beings really called to make up worlds and styles and let individual things come out in their own modes? But the question is, why should they be? And this is your point. Why isn't it enough for them